Hello everyone, welcome to Postcard Buddhism, the best channel for sharing knowledge about Buddhism. Today we will talk about the topic, Understanding Buddhism. We'll explore the evolution of Buddhist schools, the importance of experiential practice, and the various methodologies in Buddhist psychology and philosophy. We'll delve into metaphysical issues, the concept of liberation, reincarnation, and dependent origination. Lastly, we'll examine the Buddhist view on the self and provide an introduction to meditation practices. Stay tuned for a comprehensive insight into the profound teachings of Buddhism. Understanding Buddhism, the fundamental principles, the essence of humanity lies in thought. Humans take pride in their ability to think, which sets them apart from all other creatures. Man is a reed that thinks, as the saying goes, acknowledging both the fragility of humanity in the vast universe and the indomitable potential of human thought. In the face of the vastness of existence and upon self-reflection, humans thirst for understanding. This quest for knowledge aims to satisfy the mind and to live a life worth living. This inherent desire to comprehend has given birth to philosophy. How far has humanity progressed in understanding today? Has philosophy delineated the path forward for humanity? Has it resolved the profound existential questions about life, the universe, and human nature? These are the questions that even the greatest thinkers ponder with a sense of melancholy. People often question whether human knowledge can ever grasp the truth. If not, why continue thinking at all? It might seem preferable to live in ignorance, as futile contemplation only adds to human suffering. However, thinking is intrinsic to human existence. Living means thinking, and thus philosophy endures despite being deemed abstract, impractical, and futile. Because as long as humans ponder life's fundamental issues, philosophy remains relevant. 3,000 years of philosophical history seem to affirm this. In the dawn of philosophy, humans had immense faith in their intellectual capabilities. However, with skeptical philosophers, this confidence waned. The deeper humans delved into thought, the more apparent the limitations of human intellect became. Pessimism deepened as humans realized that besides intellectual weakness, they also harbored dark, biased desires, further obscuring the objective clarity needed for true knowledge. With such meager resources, humans still aspired to uncover the truth, even venturing boldly into metaphysics. The further they strayed from empirical evidence, the more fantastical their philosophical dreams became. Rationalism alone was deemed sufficient, unburdened by empirical constraints, allowing free rein in constructing metaphysical dreams. These metaphysical dreams were often subjective constructs, influenced by fallible reason and biased emotions. Consequently, one's dream was not another's, leading to myriad conflicting philosophies, with none universally acknowledged as correct. The Buddha during his time recognized the futility of these metaphysical dreams. He discouraged his disciples from indulging in metaphysical speculations and subjective delusions. Instead, he emphasized the critical task of eliminating ignorance and bias within one's intellect and emotions. Essentially, practicing to liberate oneself from ignorance and bondage. Eliminating delusion meant achieving all. Without dispelling delusion, even a lifetime of metaphysical speculation yields no fruitful results. The Buddha's approach was practical, not speculative. Buddhism is a way of living, not a metaphysical doctrine. One day the Buddha held a handful of sinsapa leaves and asked his monks, "Which is greater, the leaves in my hand or the leaves in this forest?" The monks replied, "The leaves in your hand are few, while the leaves in the forest are many." The Buddha explained, "Likewise, what I know is vast, but what I teach you is very little. Why don't I teach you everything? Because they are not beneficial for your liberation. They do not aid in ending suffering, so I do not teach them. What do I teach you? I teach about suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path to end suffering. These teachings are beneficial as they can lead you to liberation, samyutta." Clearly, Buddhism is a path, a singular path leading to the cessation of suffering. Buddhism is a practical way of living, not a fruitless doctrine or intellectual play. Buddhism recognizes the necessity of eliminating delusion. The Buddha said, "O monks, do not ponder whether the world is finite or infinite, whether it has an end or not. Regardless, the reality we must acknowledge is the suffering in this life: birth, aging, sickness, death, and Gatara. Thus, Buddhism advocates abandoning all speculative reasoning, forbidding the mind from wandering into metaphysical realms deemed delusional and futile. Buddhism brings people back to empirical reality. This empirical reality is a broad and encompassing recognition of suffering in life. Suffering is an empirical truth. Not only birth, aging, sickness, and death are suffering, but also many minor yet troubling afflictions that constantly torment people. Recognizing suffering does not merely mean acknowledging the sensation of suffering. It means understanding the inherent impermanence, non-self, and contradictory nature of all things. Broadly, recognizing suffering means realizing one's painful existence in a suffering world with unfavorable karma. All Buddhist teachings aim to make people aware of suffering and recognize suffering in this broad sense. People must deeply and widely experience this suffering, this reality of impermanence, non-self, impurity, and contradiction. Only then will they pose the essential question, what is the cause of suffering and how can it be eradicated? Those with a shallow awareness of suffering cannot identify its cause. When one profoundly experiences the suffering of impermanence, non-self, impurity, and contradiction, one easily identifies the cause of suffering. The first truth of suffering naturally leads to the second truth of the cause of suffering. The Buddha taught that the cause of suffering is delusion, unwholesome actions, and craving, and people also recognize this. The cause of suffering, like suffering itself, is not derived from metaphysical speculation, but is an empirical truth. Anyone can experience this truth. Life experience teaches this truth. The Buddha wanted people to clearly understand this truth. Buddhist scriptures elaborate on this truth. Thus, the truths of suffering and the cause of suffering are broad and comprehensive empirical truths forming the foundation of the Buddhist path. Confronted with these empirical truths, people naturally see their path: liberation from suffering. If the cause of suffering is craving, then eliminating craving eradicates suffering. This is a straightforward truth that anyone can see. Life is suffering, and the cause of suffering is craving. Eliminating craving means eliminating life's suffering. Therefore, according to Buddhism, life is suffering, and one must eliminate this suffering life to attain nirvana. Don't hastily conclude that Buddhism is overly negative, advocating non-existence, shunning life, and turning everything into nothingness. Craving is the root of suffering, the source of birth, aging, sickness, death, and countless other sufferings. But humans are not solely driven by craving. They also possess higher, purer qualities such as compassion and wisdom. Eliminating craving only eradicates the suffering part of life. In other words, it removes life's suffering aspect. When craving is eradicated, the higher, purest aspects of life are fully realized. It is impossible for the complete realization of these aspects to result in nothingness. When craving is eliminated, the negative aspects of life, impermanence, suffering, non-self, impurity, are eliminated, and the positive aspects, permanence, bliss, self, purity, are fully realized because the purest qualities in humans are fully actualized. Thus, nirvana is not nothingness. It is the complete realization of the highest, purest, most wondrous qualities. Living in a world of impermanence, non-self, impurity, and suffering, with all its cycles of birth and death, yet not seeing impermanence, non-self, impurity, and suffering in these cycles, this is nirvana. Reaching the eradication of craving, one attains liberation, complete freedom, no longer enslaved by anything. Liberation is merely a matter of changing perception. When craving is eliminated, wisdom is realized and perception immediately transforms. Impermanence, suffering, non-self, and impurity before liberated perception become permanence, bliss, self, and purity. Samsara and bondage are there, but so is nirvana and liberation. Nirvana does not exist separate from samsara. Nirvana and samsara are illusory flowers. Just as life has its negative aspect, samsara, it also has its positive aspect, nirvana. This is the third truth. However, to eliminate craving and attain nirvana, one needs a path, a method. Buddhism is that path, that method. The path of eliminating craving must be clear and must start from the shore of delusion, allowing suffering people to take their first, difficult, hesitant steps. Though there are countless methods, they are encompassed in a few essential principles: the threefold training and the Noble Eightfold Path. The threefold training: morality, sila, concentration, samadhi, and wisdom, panna. The drivers of unwholesome actions are deluded thoughts, speech, and actions. These deluded actions also nourish craving. Thus, the first task is to halt them. Morality is this cessation, not performing. Basic principles of Buddhism. The essence of humanity lies in thought. Humans can take pride in their capacity to think, which sets them apart from all other beings. Man is a reed that thinks, acknowledges both the fragility of humanity in the vast universe and the indomitable potential of human thought. Faced with the vastness of existence and upon self-reflection, humans thirst for knowledge. This quest for understanding aims to satisfy the mind and to live a life worth living. This inherent desire to comprehend has given birth to philosophy. How far has humanity progressed in understanding today? Has philosophy delineated the path forward for humanity? Has it resolved the profound existential questions about life, the universe, and human nature? These are the questions that even the greatest thinkers ponder with a sense of melancholy. People often question whether human knowledge can ever grasp the truth. If not, why continue thinking at all? It might seem preferable to live in ignorance, as futile contemplation only adds to human suffering. However, thinking is intrinsic to human existence. Living means thinking, and thus philosophy endures despite being deemed abstract, impractical, and futile, because as long as humans ponder life's fundamental issues, philosophy remains relevant. 3,000 years of philosophical history seem to affirm this. In the dawn of philosophy, humans had immense faith in their intellectual capabilities. However, with skeptical philosophers, this confidence waned. The deeper humans delved into thought, the more apparent the limitations of human intellect became. Pessimism deepened as humans realized that besides intellectual weakness, they also harbored dark, biased desires, further obscuring the objective clarity needed for true knowledge. With such meager resources, humans still aspired to uncover the truth, even venturing boldly into metaphysics. The further they strayed from empirical evidence, the more fantastical their philosophical dreams became. Rationalism alone was deemed sufficient, unburdened by empirical constraints, allowing free rein in constructing metaphysical dreams. These metaphysical dreams were often subjective constructs, influenced by fallible reason and biased emotions. Consequently, one's dream was not another's, leading to myriad conflicting philosophies, with none universally acknowledged as correct. The Buddha, during his time, recognized the futility of these metaphysical dreams. He discouraged his disciples from indulging in metaphysical speculations and subjective delusions. Instead, he emphasized the critical task of eliminating ignorance and bias within one's intellect and emotions, essentially, practicing to liberate oneself from ignorance and bondage. Eliminating delusion meant achieving all. Without dispelling delusion, even a lifetime of metaphysical speculation yields no fruitful results. The Buddha's approach was practical, not speculative. Buddhism is a way of living, not a metaphysical doctrine. One day the Buddha held a handful of sinsipa leaves and asked his monks, "Which is greater, the leaves in my hand or the leaves in this forest?" The monks replied, "The leaves in your hand are few, while the leaves in the forest are many." The Buddha explained, "Likewise, what I know is vast, but what I teach you is very little. Why don't I teach you everything? Because they are not beneficial for your liberation. They do not aid in ending suffering, so I do not teach them. What do I teach you? I teach about suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path to end suffering. These teachings are beneficial as they can lead you to liberation." Samyutta. Clearly, Buddhism is a path, a singular path leading to the cessation of suffering. Buddhism is a practical way of living, not a fruitless doctrine or intellectual play. Buddhism recognizes the necessity of eliminating delusion. The Buddha said, "O monks, do not ponder whether the world is finite or infinite, whether it has an end or not. Regardless, the reality we must acknowledge is the suffering in this life: birth, aging, sickness, death, and etc." Thus, Buddhism advocates abandoning all speculative reasoning, forbidding the mind from wandering into metaphysical realms deemed delusional and futile. Buddhism brings people back to empirical reality. This empirical reality is a broad and encompassing recognition of suffering in life. Suffering is an empirical truth. Not only birth, aging, sickness, and death are suffering, but also many minor yet troubling afflictions that constantly torment people. Recognizing suffering does not merely mean acknowledging the sensation of suffering. It means understanding the inherent impermanence, non-self, and contradictory nature of all things. Broadly, recognizing suffering means realizing one's painful existence in a suffering world with unfavorable karma. All Buddhist teachings aim to make people aware of suffering and recognize suffering in this broad sense. People must deeply and widely experience this suffering, this reality of impermanence, non-self, impurity, and contradiction. Only then will they pose the essential question, what is the cause of suffering and how can it be eradicated? Those with a shallow awareness of suffering cannot identify its cause. When one profoundly experiences the suffering of impermanence, non-self, impurity, and contradiction, one easily identifies the cause of suffering. The first truth of suffering naturally leads to the second truth of the cause of suffering. The Buddha taught that the cause of suffering is delusion, unwholesome actions, and craving, and people also recognize this. The cause of suffering, like suffering itself, is not derived from metaphysical speculation, but is an empirical truth. Anyone can experience this truth. Life experience teaches this truth. The Buddha wanted people to clearly understand this truth. Buddhist scriptures elaborate on this truth. Thus, the truths of suffering and the cause of suffering are broad and comprehensive empirical truths, forming the foundation of the Buddhist path. Confronted with these empirical truths, people naturally see their path: liberation from suffering. If the cause of suffering is craving, then eliminating craving eradicates suffering. This is a straightforward truth that anyone can see. Life is suffering, and the cause of suffering is craving. Eliminating craving means eliminating life's suffering. Therefore, according to Buddhism, life is suffering, and one must eliminate this suffering life to attain nirvana. Don't hastily conclude that Buddhism is overly negative, advocating non-existence, shunning life, and turning everything into nothingness. Craving is the root of suffering, the source of birth, aging, sickness, death, and countless other sufferings. But humans are not solely driven by craving. They also possess higher, pure qualities such as compassion and wisdom. Eliminating craving only eradicates the suffering part of life. In other words, it removes life's suffering aspect. When craving is eradicated, the higher, purest aspects of life are fully realized. It is impossible for the complete realization of these aspects to result in nothingness. When craving is eliminated, the negative aspects of life, impermanence, suffering, non-self, impurity, are eliminated, and the positive aspects, permanence, bliss, self, purity, are fully realized because the purest qualities in humans are fully actualized. Thus, nirvana is not nothingness, it is the complete realization of the highest, purest, most wondrous qualities. Living in a world of impermanence, non-self, impurity, and suffering, with all its cycles of birth and death, yet not seeing impermanence, non-self, impurity, and suffering in these cycles. This is nirvana. Reaching the eradication of craving, one attains liberation, complete freedom, no longer enslaved by anything. Liberation is merely a matter of changing perception. When craving is eliminated, wisdom is realized and perception immediately transforms. Impermanence, suffering, non-self, and impurity, before liberated perception, become permanence, bliss, self, and purity. Samsara and bondage are there, but so is nirvana and liberation. Nirvana does not exist separate from samsara. Nirvana and samsara are illusory flowers. Just as life has its negative aspect, samsara, it also has its positive aspect, nirvana. This is the third truth. However, to eliminate craving and attain nirvana, one needs a path, a method. Buddhism is that path, that method. The path of eliminating craving must be clear and must start from the shore of delusion, allowing suffering people to take their first, difficult, hesitant steps. Though there are countless methods, they are encompassed in a few essential principles: the threefold training and the noble eightfold path. The threefold training: morality, sila, concentration, samadhi, and wisdom, panna. The drivers of unwholesome actions are deluded thoughts, speech, and actions. These deluded actions also nourish craving. Thus, the first task is to halt them. Morality is this cessation. Not performing, not speaking, and not thinking deluded actions mean not submitting to the dictates of craving. This is the first revolutionary step. Succeeding in this initial resistance and non-compliance, one can hope to progress to the stage of eliminating craving. Practicing morality means not adding more fuel to the flame of craving. Nevertheless, the flame still burns fiercely. Thus, one must employ more proactive measures to gradually weaken this burning and ultimately extinguish the flame. Through the power of practicing morality, one's will becomes stronger. The practitioner will practice concentrating thoughts, using the power of meditation to gradually cut away the entangled roots of craving. Through persistent effort, they can eventually uproot it. As craving is gradually eradicated, wisdom grows. The more wisdom grows, the more powerful the effort to destroy craving becomes. Thus, the practitioner progresses toward completely eradicating the subtlest seeds of suffering. From morality arises concentration. From concentration arises wisdom, encapsulates the threefold training. However, the threefold training must be established on correct understanding, right view. One needs to thoroughly understand and realize the four basic truths, the Four Noble Truths, to avoid false perceptions and wrong views contrary to the truth. Following the Buddha's teachings to correctly apply concentration and meditation, right concentration and right mindfulness. Reflecting only on correct teachings, right thought. Diligently following the right path, right effort. Having a proper means of livelihood, right livelihood. Acting and speaking according to the correct teachings, right action and right speech. This is the Noble Eightfold Path. The path is arduous but the only one. All the rich systems of Buddhist teachings have one purpose, to present the method and path to liberation. Beyond that, they do not aim to resolve metaphysical speculations. Anyone who views Buddhism as a science of metaphysics has misunderstood Buddhism. Historical issues. Currently, all Buddhist sects, whether Mahayana or Theravada, whether northern or southern traditions, are not the original form of Buddhism. All have undergone various transformations. These transformations have not only preserved the fundamental qualities of Buddhism, but have also fully exploited them to develop according to the needs of different eras and regions. If Buddhism were merely a set of rigid dogmas, it would not hold the esteemed position it does today in human culture. Buddhism is a doctrine full of vigorous vitality, rich enough to continue evolving over thousands of years to meet the needs of nations and times. The distinctive feature of Buddhism is that it is not a rigid dogma confined within a framework. Buddha's teachings are indeterminate, adaptable to the time and place to suit the capacities of sentient beings. One could say that original Buddhism was a doctrine tree, robust, healthy, and vigorous. This doctrine tree has matured over time and has now become a large tree with lush, abundant branches and leaves. No one should demand that this doctrine tree remain in its original state, preventing its growth. If it had not grown, it would have withered away and we would not have it today. Instead, it has grown vigorously because it possesses a powerful life force. Now it stands large and flourishing, but it remains the same doctrine tree. All the current doctrinal systems and sects in the world today originate from original Buddhism, or in other words, they are developments of original Buddhism. These doctrinal systems were inherently present in original Buddhism but were elaborated and propagated according to the needs of the times. Whether original or modern, Buddhism remains Buddhism, aiming for liberation from suffering, respecting life and truth, and advocating compassion and salvation. Just as the water of the ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, my teachings also have one taste, the taste of liberation. Confining oneself to the framework of Southern Buddhism and claiming that Northern Buddhism is not original, or standing from the perspective of Mahayana doctrine and considering Theravada as narrow-minded and rigid, are both biased attitudes and unworthy. We should look at the teachings through the needs of humanity to see the indomitable potential of Buddhism and its positive, engaged spirit. Buddhist literature vividly testifies to this truth. Even if Southern Buddhism prides itself on retaining many original qualities, we still see changes in thought and organization. The new era and new activities have created these changes. In the North, with various climates and lifestyles, Buddhism has adapted to integrate into the lives of different peoples. The positive, engaged spirit of Buddhism has been one of the reasons for its vigorous development. In the Buddha's time, people suffered greatly and thus longed for personal liberation. Buddhist teachings naturally catered to this need for liberation. People focused on promoting personal liberation teachings, almost neglecting the teachings of positive engagement. Mahayana scriptures were almost forgotten, unmentioned. Gradually, as times changed, attention shifted to Mahayana scriptures, and Mahayana teachings were promoted. Therefore, Mahayana scriptures appeared later than Theravada scriptures. The Mahayana teachings that the Buddha transmitted privately to bodhisattvas, those with great capacity and an engaged spirit, were only given attention later on. Thus, when studying Buddhist literature, we should set aside our prejudices to clearly see the spirit and potential of the entirety of Buddhist teachings. Experiential validation. All Buddhist teachings are founded on the experiential realizations of the Buddha, bodhisattvas, and accomplished monks. Consequently, Buddhist thought has been concretely experienced. Buddhism divorced from experiential validation is like Christianity without prayer. Without prayer, Christianity loses its vitality, and without experiential validation, Buddhism loses its essence. The truth realized by the Buddha is called the essential teaching. The words and logic he used to express that truth are termed the symbolic teaching. These are not the truth itself, but frameworks for experiencing the truth. The doctrines of the Sarvastivada, the Satyasiddhi, the Yogacara, the Tiantai, or the Huayan schools all result from experiential realizations through meditation. Depending on the depth of realization and the needs of the era and audience, the interpretation of the teachings varies. Each doctrine presents an aspect of the truth, a symbolic representation of it. Any system of Buddhist doctrine is grounded in meditative insight. If these doctrines later became heavily formalized and theoretical, it is because later generations focused on theoretical discussions rather than actual practice. Transforming Buddhism into a purely theoretical study is a sign of its decline. Buddhism emphasizes experiential validation over mere intellectual debate. If the ancient masters had not practiced the 4 meditative absorptions, dhyana, and the 4 formless attainments, we would not have the Sarvastivada doctrine today. Without the practice of the 5-fold contemplation of consciousness only, we would not have the Yogacara teachings. If they had not practiced the 2-fold truths and emptiness contemplations, we would not have the 3 treatises school. But if we only discuss these doctrines without practicing them, how can the vitality of the Dharma be revealed? In Buddhist experiential methods, we see 2 parts, samatha, calming, and vipassana, insight. Samatha involves regulating sensations, controlling mental images, and abandoning all distracting thoughts. This is the negative aspect. Vipassana, the positive aspect, involves investigating meditative topics, relying on the focused power of the mind. When samatha and vipassana are practiced in balance and harmony, they lead the practitioner to realize the truth. Samatha's function is to prevent mental distraction and create a sense of peace, autonomy, and liberation, elements that form meditative joy. Vipassana's function is to unify the mind's potential with the object of contemplation, eliminating the distinction between subject and object, and producing direct realization of the truth, insight, wisdom. Here, doctrinal contemplations serve as aids for meditative intuition. Therefore, no matter how refined doctrinal arguments may be, or how lofty doctrinal ideals may appear, they remain within the realm of intellect and serve only as frameworks. Practitioners must use these frameworks as foundations for their samatha vipassana practice. If doctrines are not learned and applied in this manner, no matter how extensive, they are merely empty concepts. After realizing the truth, the Buddha provided his monastic disciples with materials and methods to experientially realize that truth. These teachings were suited to their capacities and levels. We cannot gauge the content of the Buddha's experiential realization from these materials and methods, for that content resides solely in his own experience. The content is only partially expressed through the teachings. Practices such as the 4 Noble Truths contemplation, the 12 links of dependent origination contemplation, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and the 4 immeasurables are forms of teachings expressed at specific times and to specific audiences. Later, bodhisattvas and enlightened masters continued to express and doctrinalize their experiential realizations according to the needs of their times. Thanks to the continuous efforts of enlightened beings, Buddhism has gradually diversified and enriched itself doctrinally. Nevertheless, From ancient times to the present, Buddhist teachings have been understood as fingers pointing to the moon, as means to indicate the truth. Teachings cannot be the truth themselves because teachings are words, concepts, and logic, whereas truth is direct experience, transcending intellectual speculation. Truth can be expressed in countless ways and doctrinalized on theoretical bases compatible with human cognition. The doctrinal systems established later are the results of Buddhism's ongoing development to suit different capacities and times. For instance, the doctrine of emptiness in Majjhimaka is an expression of truth from a dialectical perspective. The doctrine of consciousness only in Yogacara is an expression of truth from an epistemological perspective. The doctrine of thusness in the awakening of faith is an expression of truth from an ontological perspective. All are results of experiential validation. Studying these doctrines enhances our understanding for practice, not to see the truth directly. In conclusion, Buddhist doctrines have value because they are the results of experiential realization. Over 2.5 millennia, these doctrines have been enriched through the continuous practice and realization of predecessors. The vitality of Buddhism has been nurtured through the ages by the practice and realization of monastic practitioners. Today, genuine realizers seem rare, and thus the vitality of the Dharma is not as dynamic as before. Studying Buddhist doctrines is favored by people in our era. But what is the point if we are content with mere concepts? Striving for actual practice and realization is truly what will rejuvenate the life force of Buddhism. Methodological issues, rational psychology or metaphysical psychology, bases itself on psychological phenomena perceived by consciousness and the senses to determine the nature of the mind. From this determination, it progresses to infer its causes and ultimate purpose. Based purely on logical principles, these determinations and inquiries cannot be experimentally verified. Buddhist studies hold that reason and senses do not possess absolute cognitive value, and inferences based on the intellect, heavily laden with ignorance and delusion, are prone to error. Contemporary science has validated this assertion. Experimental psychology also studies psychological phenomena and determines the causes and laws governing their emergence, existence, and cessation. All these determinations are verified through psychological experiments, employing scientific methods to understand and explain psychological activities accurately and to identify general but concrete laws about these phenomena. However, it cannot ascertain the nature and ultimate purpose of the soul. While these findings are valuable, the journey is still long and the discoveries made thus far are limited. Moreover, science is not yet a complete instrument to verify human knowledge and truth, burdened as it is with desire and prejudice, which clearly indicates its immaturity. Buddhism distinguishes 3 cognitive capabilities: direct perception, pratyaksha, inference, anumana, and scriptural testimony, agama. Direct perception is the awareness through direct experience, knowledge without the need for inference. There are 2 types of direct perception: true direct perception when correct, and false direct perception when incorrect. Inference is the knowledge based on reasoning. There are 2 types: true inference, correct reasoning, and false inference, incorrect reasoning. Scriptural testimony refers to the knowledge of enlightened beings, the unimpeded wisdom of true direct perception. These enlightened beings realize truth through direct perception, perceiving reality without the need for inference, and then skillfully convey that truth to sentient beings through inference-based reasoning. The ignorant minds of sentient beings cannot grasp this truth. They must gradually progress towards it through their own experiential practice and realization. Therefore, Buddhist studies differ from rational psychology. Buddhist studies are not based on the inferential speculation of sentient beings, but on the teachings of the enlightened ones. This is why Buddhism is often considered a religion. However, Buddhism never demands blind faith. It retains a full spirit of scientific experimentation in its inquiry. Belief is optional. Scholars must simultaneously be practitioners, much like scientists continually advancing in their research and understanding, to gradually realize the truth of scriptural testimony and see clearly what their previously deluded minds could not. To understand, one must experience it firsthand. Only the person drinking water knows if it is hot or cold. This sensation cannot be directly conveyed to someone who has not drunk it. The truth taught by enlightened beings, like the Buddha, is for us to believe or not. However, we possess enough intelligence to see that these teachings have never been wrong. With this recognition, we can trust in the Buddha's enlightenment. Many teachings of the Buddha have been validated by science and experience, which should be sufficient for us to place our trust in his complete enlightenment. We must then follow the Buddha's teachings to realize the truth for ourselves, as this cannot be delegated to anyone else. Buddhist studies are empirical but differ from experimental psychology in that Buddhism elucidates ultimate truth while experimental psychology is still groping in the dark. Moreover, what experimental psychology considers empirical is not necessarily accurate, as the scientific method itself is not yet deemed absolutely reliable. Buddhism asserts that absolute truth cannot be expressed through language or written words. Truth is infinite, boundless, without limits. Intellect, language, and words are finite and limited. It is impossible to compare the finite with the infinite, or contain the boundless within the limited. Truth in books is not the truth itself. Words and language are merely shadows of truth. Even these shadows are not the truth, let alone shadows that have been distorted. The Buddha taught for 45 years and said, "In these 45 years, I have not uttered a single word." This statement highlights that truth cannot be conveyed through language. The Diamond Sutra teaches, if one claims to have attained realization, that is not true realization. The Buddha also taught, interpreting the scriptures verbatim is to wrong the Buddhas of the three times, but deviating from the scriptures, even by a word, aligns with the devil's teachings. Scriptures and the teachings of the enlightened are not the truth, but means to point out the truth. To claim these are the truth is to wrong the Buddhas of the three times. But if one dismisses these means, nothing remains but the devil's teachings. The Buddha taught, "Truth is like the moon, and my teachings are like a finger pointing to the moon. Do not mistake my finger for the moon itself." This metaphor is profound and comprehensive. The taste of durian, the appearance of bacteria under a microscope, these are not difficult to understand, yet we cannot describe them directly to someone who has not experienced them. How much more so for truth, which only the enlightened mind can fully realize. Therefore, studying to understand the truth is an impossible dream. Studying to practice and realize the truth oneself is the work of a Buddhist student. The purpose of Buddhist studies is not merely to satisfy intellectual curiosity, but to serve as a means to point out the truth, as it is not the ultimate truth itself. It is expressed through language and based on the inferential intellect of sentient beings. Everything expressed through words is a means, and a means is not the truth. What is the truth? Where is it found? Truth transcends language and words. Contradictions indicate errors, regardless of their magnitude. Buddhism asserts that all concepts inherently contain contradictions, and any articulated truth is relative, just as Taoism states, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao." Contradictions lead to the negation of the conceptualization of truth and guide us toward a higher understanding, still within the relative realm. Relative truths inherently contain contradictions, leading to their negation and advancing our understanding. Thus, Buddhism is a complete dialectical method. Materialist dialectics still have shortcomings. They can be deemed erroneous because they contain contradictions. Hence, Buddhism differs significantly from abstract metaphysical theories. As we know, the teachings of the enlightened, while not the truth, are invaluable as they are means to indicate the truth. They are not the truth because they are expressed through language, a means created according to the inferential intellect of sentient beings. But without them, we have no foundation to realize the truth. Therefore, study to understand, to see, to avoid mistaking truth as expressible through language, and to use these means to reach the ultimate. In studying, we have the right to doubt, and doubt is a tool for enlightenment because doubt leads to realization. Do not blindly adhere to texts. Use intellect and practice to contemplate the truth and achieve enlightenment. This approach distinguishes Buddhist studies from Western psychology. The key is not to cling, as clinging obscures truth, while breaking free from clinging also dispels delusive desires that cloud direct insight. Two friends stand together, one facing south and the other north. The one facing south sees a phoenix fly by and says, "Look, a phoenix." But by the time the friend turns, the bird is gone. The friend insists on knowing what a phoenix is, its shape, and its features. The first friend describes it, but the other still does not understand. He finally draws a phoenix, but the drawing is only a representation, not the real bird. If the friend mistakes the drawing for a real phoenix, he will never understand what a true phoenix is. Similarly, in Buddhist study, we must see the truth directly through insight, not just infer it, as the friend saw only a representation, not the actual phoenix. Metaphysical issues, every individual or society, regardless of how primitive or ancient their way of life, inherently possesses a worldview. These individuals or societies may not consciously recognize that they have a worldview, but this perspective subtly guides their lives, significantly influencing their actions, thoughts, and words, which they might believe they decide upon in the moment. Human beings always strive to act according to their understanding, whether that understanding resides in the conscious or subconscious mind. A way of living, in other words, a concept of human existence, is always established on a concept of the universe. The human world is inevitably a part of the natural world, and the functioning of the human world, if it is to be successful, must harmonize with the grand harmony of the natural world. Lao Tzu recognized this important truth early on when he said, "Not knowing the great harmony of the universe to follow it, but acting arbitrarily will inevitably lead to disaster." If one's concept of the universe is materialistic, they will act in one way. If another's concept is theistic, they will act differently. And if I have yet another concept, I will act in yet another way. Different perceptions lead to different actions. Having a worldview is akin to having a belief. There is no difference. There are individual worldviews for each person and each society, but there is no single worldview for all of humanity. Depending on our cognitive abilities, we accept a pre-existing worldview or create a new one. Similarly, based on human nature, we accept a religious belief or build a new one. Therefore, it is not necessary to believe in a deity to have faith. Merely possessing a worldview equates to having a belief. Hence, even materialists possess a belief. Their belief is a materialistic worldview, which they may fervently worship as passionately as any fanatic worships their God. Having a concept of the universe means having answers to some metaphysical questions, or at least believing in some pre-existing answers. Discussing metaphysics means venturing into the realm of the super-empirical. Here, only hypotheses exist which cannot be experimentally verified. If we accept a certain hypothesis, either consciously or subconsciously, we have a belief about the universe. We have a worldview. We then act based on that belief. For example, an Indian philosophical school posits that the entire human and cosmic world we see exists within Brahma's dream. Brahma feels bored and seeks amusement by dreaming. In his dream, the world, humanity, and animals appear. When he wakes up, all these things disappear. If I believe in this worldview, I will sit and wait for Brahma to wake up, feeling relieved. But if I believe that this world is created by a supreme deity, and that humans will be saved if they believe in this deity, I will act differently. I will place all my hopes in this deity and obey their commands absolutely. Or if I believe there is no divine force, that the world is purely a material reality, and that the human soul is merely an attribute of matter, with nothing remaining after death, I will disregard karma and retribution and easily commit countless crimes. Thus, a proper concept of the universe is crucial for human life. The closer a worldview is to truth, the closer humans will be to happiness. The more erroneous a worldview is, the more flawed the concept of human life becomes, and the more humans suffer. But how can we determine whether one concept is closer to truth and another is further? There are countless different concepts and beliefs. Everyone thinks their concept is the truth, but in the end, no concept is universally accepted because all concepts are merely metaphysical answers beyond the empirical realm. Therefore, some people seek to eliminate metaphysical answers from their minds and reject any preconceived worldview. They prefer to begin with empirical life and seek understanding directly from empirical life. These individuals are spiritual practitioners. They do not let their minds wander in metaphysical realms. They return to reality, live with it, and observe it. The closest reality is their own body and the surrounding life. They utilize their spiritual strength and discover truths they can clearly experience. The body is impure, feelings are suffering, the mind is impermanent, and phenomena are non-self. They see their bodies and lives as a continuous stream of physical and psychological processes driven by karmic forces. They strive to eliminate negative karma and nurture positive karma to transform a life of suffering into one of peace. When ignorance is eradicated and wisdom is cultivated, they achieve enlightenment, comprehending the mysteries of all phenomena and participating in the universe's operation. They then teach those who have not yet awakened, guiding them to act in harmony with the universe and achieve enlightenment. Following these teachings, people can also develop a worldview. They believe in karma, rebirth, and the law of cause and effect and act accordingly to build a reasonable, less painful, and more peaceful life. They act according to the truth and do not fear suffering consequences from wrongful actions. They have a worldview and a belief system, benefiting from the discoveries of enlightened beings. This worldview or belief system is a vehicle leading them to the truth, helping them reach the goal with less difficulty. Those spiritual practitioners who make such discoveries do not need to rely on any belief system or worldview. They begin with empirical life. Without needing any belief or accepting any metaphysical concept beforehand, they can still reach the truth and achieve enlightenment. Thus, in Buddhism, metaphysical issues are not critical for those seeking spiritual experience. The Buddha often rebuked monks who delved into metaphysical questions for this reason. He taught that the most important thing is to strive for liberation and enlightenment. Do not waste time and effort on metaphysical issues. Monks, do not worry about whether the world is finite or infinite, whether it has limits or is limitless. Regardless of whether the world is finite or infinite, what we must acknowledge in this life are the sufferings of birth, aging, illness, and death. With this teaching, the Buddha brought his disciples back to reality to address the most crucial issue: liberation from suffering. The reality of suffering is evident and needs urgent resolution. There is no time to seek far-off matters. A story in the scriptures recounts a man who, after being struck by a poisoned arrow, refused to let anyone remove it and treat his wound. Wait before removing the arrow. I need to find out who shot me, what they look like, their name, village, and whether they had any enmity with me before removing the arrow. By the time he had gathered all this information, the poison would have spread throughout his body, making it impossible to save him. The Buddha concluded that his disciples must quickly practice the methods of liberation from suffering and not waste time investigating trivial matters. In the forest of truths that the Buddha had reached, he selected only a few fundamental truths beneficial for liberation from suffering to teach his disciples. Here we must recall the Buddha's teaching in the Samyutta Nikaya. The unenlightened disciples often questioned nirvana and asked about it. The Buddha frequently remained silent in response to these questions. His silence was itself an answer. Seeking to understand nirvana is beyond the capability of ordinary intellect and ultimately a futile effort that can lead to delusion. Nirvana is a reality that needs to be directly experienced, not an object of rational speculation. Not emphasizing metaphysical issues is a unique aspect of Buddhism. A monk determined to attain enlightenment does not need to have the faith of a devotee. They do not need to concern themselves with issues of heavenly realms, rebirth, or hell. They only need to focus on liberation from suffering. Because they can directly perceive the suffering, emptiness, impermanence, and non-self nature of all phenomena, the truth of suffering, and the causes of these binding sufferings, the truth of the origin of suffering, they are determined to eradicate them through reasonable methods, the truth of the path, to achieve the cessation of suffering and live in peace, the truth of cessation. Once successful, they will know everything and understand everything, for they will be living in truth. But not all humanity consists of such noble individuals. Those determined to renounce pleasures and seek the truth are always few. They are brave warriors. Without sufficient endurance and determination, they will easily give up. They will return to the gradual path of the majority, a relatively less arduous path. Here, belief plays a more crucial role. Guided by enlightened beings, people believe in karma, merit, sin, and rebirth, and act according to these beliefs. These truths, though partially metaphysical, form a belief system, a worldview, that provides a foundation for a more peaceful and less painful life. These truths can be partially grasped through reasoning and fully realized through spiritual practice that anyone can undertake. If successful, they embark on the path of enlightenment of the great beings. Therefore, if one has a weak foundation, they will be content with the gradual path, starting with a belief system, a belief that can be accepted through reasoning, not an unconditional belief, and merging into the path of experiential truth when they have a stronger foundation. If one is strong and enthusiastic, meaning they have a great capacity, they will choose the path of the supreme beings, engaging in spiritual practice, eliminating desires, cultivating wisdom, and achieving enlightenment. With this path, no metaphysical belief is necessary. Thoughts and debates about metaphysical issues are irrelevant and only waste time and create more delusions. Spiritual practice leads to enlightenment, understanding all wondrous truths with prajna wisdom. Truth can only be fully realized through experience. Thus, all metaphysical speculations are unnecessary debates. Once again, as students of Buddhism, we must not think that Buddhist teachings aim to answer metaphysical questions. The issue of liberation, the waters of the four seas, all have one taste, the taste of salt. Similarly, my teachings all have one taste, the taste of liberation. This statement by the Buddha confirms that the sole purpose of Buddhism is to lead sentient beings to liberation and enlightenment. Therefore, all Buddhists, whether monastic or lay, must aim toward this goal of liberation. To speak of liberation is to speak of release and freedom. One only thinks of release and freedom when one feels constrained and confined, in short, when one thinks of liberation. So what binds and confines people? All sentient beings, obscured by ignorance, driven by desires and afflictions, create countless evil deeds, causing them to drift in the sea of suffering and samsara, Lankavatara Sutra. Tracing from effect to cause, we find the sea of suffering and samsara, evil deeds, desires and afflictions, obscured true nature, ignorance. Due to ignorance, true nature is obscured, leading to desires and afflictions. Desires create evil deeds, and evil deeds result in the suffering of samsara. Liberation means breaking this continuous chain of cause and effect. However, to achieve liberation, one must first recognize that they are bound. Many people live in bondage without knowing they are bound, thus never thinking about liberation. Therefore, to make them think of liberation, one must first make them realize their bondage. Buddhism's method is to make people aware of the life they are living, a life of suffering. One cannot be at peace in a life of suffering and must seek to escape it. What chains bind people to a life of suffering? These are desires, afflictions, evil deeds, and ignorance. Breaking these chains allows one to reach a horizon of freedom, free from suffering. Thus, the path to liberation begins with an awareness, recognizing that life is suffering. This is the first truth in the Four Noble Truths. Many have achieved liberation through deep awareness of this truth. The more one feels life is suffering, the more determined they are to walk the path of liberation. Suffering here acts like a bitter medicine, extremely bitter, but it is a miraculous cure for the disease of afflictions. However, suffering here does not only mean painful feelings. The word dukkha in Buddhism also means non-self, impurity, impermanence, and darkness. Living, one may have many doubts about oneself. What is our self? Is it a physical entity, rupa, or a combination of psychological phenomena, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness? How can there be an unchanging self in the midst of changing phenomena? Perhaps the self is just a false name, an object of delusion. Living, one always finds the mind a source of many unwholesome thoughts, greed, anger, delusion, and the body a tool for creating many evil deeds, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct. Both the mind and the body are force of sins. The mind is the root of evil, the body the field of sin. 8 realizations of the Great Being Sutra. At times, one even loathes oneself. Living, one always feels enslaved to desires, enslaved to the life created by our evil deeds. We are trapped in the cycle of karma, lost in the darkness of ignorance. We do not live in the present, do not see the present, do not reach the present. The form of life we perceive with our senses is already the past. Everything is always changing. We only live in the past, never in life itself. We are like people sitting in a car facing backward, only seeing what is past. At night, the stars we see are not the stars of the present. Millions of stars have perished over centuries, yet their light still reaches us. And the stars of today will only be seen by future generations. Never having lived in life, never having lived in the present, how much suffering this causes us. We feel like all frustrations are piling up, and we want to break free from the chains of ignorance to reach the horizon of reality, to live freely in life, to integrate into eternal life. These sufferings, these feelings of imprisonment, dispel our desires for the deceptive pleasures of life and make us determined to walk firmly on the path of self-liberation. The truth, life is suffering, must create dissatisfaction in us. This dissatisfaction must reach its peak to trigger a profound crisis that changes our life. We discard all desires of the mundane suffering life and set out to find truth and liberation. In the world of truth and freedom, we will be at peace, free from all suffering and doubts. Life is suffering is thus a crucial issue for us. This truth must not be understood too simplistically. We should not understand suffering only as painful feelings, but with all its meanings of impermanence, non-self, impurity, and ignorance. However, a distinctive feature of Buddhism is that its teachings must adapt to the times. The truth, life is suffering, may be a valuable medicine for those with great capacities, but it can be a dangerous poison for the weak. One may strive to eliminate suffering for liberation, while another may feel more pain and despair, eventually sinking deeper into suffering. Thus, for those with great capacities and the ability to liberate, Buddhism reveals the truth, life is suffering. Once they realize they are living in suffering, they will determinedly eliminate it. The teachings for such people are the transcendent teachings, supramundane dharma. For those with weak capacities, Buddhism first builds their character. Their teachings are the worldly teachings, mundane dharma, of the human and heavenly realms. There is no need to aim for immediate liberation in the present. If such a goal is set now, they will become discouraged and fearful. The more they become aware of suffering, the more they feel pain. Their goal is closer to them than the ultimate goal of liberation. They will take one step at a time and only aim for the ultimate goal of liberation when they are strong enough. These near-term goals, though not the ultimate goal, are means to gradually reach the ultimate goal. Through the provisional teachings, one can see the ultimate teachings, and through the 5 vehicles of Buddhism, one can see the single Buddha vehicle, Lotus Sutra. For this reason, the Buddha taught that his teachings have only one taste, the taste of liberation. The truth, life is suffering, is the transcendent teaching for the superior individuals. The majority of people, due to their weak capacities, cannot fully practice it. They must rely on the human and heavenly vehicles' teachings, setting nearer goals to avoid becoming overwhelmed and discouraged. Worldly teachings do not require people to see life with all its suffering truths, which would only increase their despair. Lavancio misunderstood Buddhism's provisional teachings when he said, "For the general public, such thoughts and teachings, life is suffering, only enhance their awareness of the suffering they are enduring." People often say, Buddhism advocates world weariness. Indeed, for as long as one is attached to life and its desires, they cannot liberate themselves from suffering. Only when one is thoroughly weary of life can they think of liberation. Weariness here means weariness of one way of living, living according to ignorant desires, and seeking another way of living, living according to compassion and truth. Therefore, liberation is different from escape. Transforming one's life from impurity to purity, from suffering to peace, that is liberation. The weariness in Buddhism is a healthy weariness because its object is desire. It is weariness without despair. In contrast, worldly weariness is pathological, advocating resignation. Those who criticize Buddhism as world-weary should try practicing the Buddhist weariness for a moment. They will find it difficult because their desires are too strong. To be weary, one must at least diminish their desires. However, this discussion pertains to the transcendent teachings. Regarding the worldly teachings, most people lack the capacity to immediately pursue liberation. They must practice the human and heavenly vehicle's teachings, abandoning evil, doing good, nurturing wisdom and compassion to build a strong foundation for the transcendent stage. Raising the issue of suffering to them while they are still weak will only increase their suffering. The issue of rebirth. For those enlightened disciples, the reality of samsara, the cycle of birth and death, is evident and indisputable. However, these enlightened beings primarily appeared during the Buddha's time and in the following centuries. Today, very few attain the state of arhat, one who is free from the cycle of rebirth, which means few can directly experience the teachings of the Buddha. Consequently, the doctrines of karma and rebirth have become subjects of personal belief, making the concept of rebirth a matter of individual faith. According to the Buddhist teachings, we believe that our present existence is a result of past actions, karma. Our current circumstances and the nature of our lives are outcomes of our thoughts, words, and actions from previous lives. Due to continuous ignorance, we create karma and live in an existence characterized by impermanence, suffering, and non-self. This ignorance leads us to mistakenly believe in a permanent, unchanging self. This delusion about the self gives rise to desires, which in turn propel us to create further karmic actions, leading to an endless cycle of birth, death, and suffering. Only when we eradicate the root causes of these karmic actions can we attain liberation from the cycle of rebirth. At that point, the impermanent, suffering-filled life will cease to exist, and we will reside peacefully in nirvana, the blissful state resulting from the cultivation of wholesome, non-defiling actions. In this state, ignorance and delusions are no more, as we will have attained supreme wisdom and complete liberation from the darkness of ignorance. The doctrines of karma and rebirth are inseparable realities. To believe in karma is to believe in rebirth. Buddhists do not require scientific proof to accept the doctrines of karma and rebirth. This is because these doctrines are established on the immutable laws of the universe that the Buddha directly perceived through his enlightened wisdom. The Buddha presented his discoveries in fundamental teachings such as the Four Noble Truths and the 12 Links of Dependent Origination. He personally realized the absolute truth and taught that all individuals could achieve enlightenment and liberate themselves from the cycle of rebirth and karmic retribution. The path to enlightenment is the Noble Eightfold Path. The Buddha and other enlightened beings attained liberation through inner intuition. The path of inner intuition is the path of Eastern mystics, while the Western approach is the intermediary path of scientific observation and experience. Western methods rely on precise measurement and mathematical analysis, supported by machinery and scientific tools. Although the scientific method of seeking truth is lengthy, it has brought significant advancements, particularly in medicine, chemistry, and physics. However, the most notable contribution of science is its ability to clarify our understanding of the world. Science has developed many tools to extend the capabilities of our senses, allowing us to perceive more of the world. However, all these marvelous inventions only expand the range of our sensory perception. They do not enable us to perceive the absolute reality of all things. We can only understand reality within a very narrow scope, peering at the universe through tiny windows, even though science has greatly enhanced our visual and auditory perception. Modern humans have concluded that there are countless phenomena in the universe that we cannot perceive with our senses, even with the aid of scientific inventions. Some scientists have begun to question whether there is a method that allows the senses to perceive reality more effectively than scientific methods, leading some to turn to spiritual studies. Certain extraordinary individuals have perceived many realities that ordinary senses cannot detect. This fact demonstrates that humans can perceive reality through methods entirely different from conventional sensory perception. Moreover, since Freud discovered the phenomenon of the unconscious, using methods like hypnosis and psychoanalysis for treatment, people have observed that some individuals can recall events from when they were 3 or 4 years old, which they had completely forgotten when awake. Today, psychiatry uses psychoanalytic and hypnotic techniques by injecting patients with substances like sodium amytal or pentotal during sleep to understand and treat various mental disorders such as psychoneurosis. Furthermore, in experiments known as age regression, psychologists have shown that people under hypnosis can completely relive their childhood. These psychologists can instruct individuals under hypnosis to write exactly as they did when they were 10 or 7 years old. If pushed further back to when they were 3 or 4, they can no longer write and only produce scribbles. Modern psychology has scientifically proven that, besides conscious actions, humans also have unconscious actions that preserve experiences and perceptions from birth. With the insights provided by modern psychology, the doctrine of rebirth becomes more comprehensible and acceptable to those with some scientific knowledge. It is evident that the unconscious not only retains images and experiences of this life, but also preserves those from past lives. This demonstrates that the unconscious stores the karmic seeds from many past life stages. Buddhist teachings explain that when a person dies, the karma created in their life persists. It is the cause for a new stage of existence. This means that the karma is reborn in the unconscious of a new being, becoming a driving force for that being's growth and development. Karma is seen as identical with consciousness, referred to as continuing relinking consciousness, padasandhi vinana. When a child is born, the unconscious already lies deep within their consciousness, while the manifest consciousness begins to emerge and develop. The unconscious contains past karmic seeds, influencing and guiding conscious actions according to past patterns. In this present life, we act under the influence of latent forces, which modern psychology calls unconscious desires, suas inconscience, that have existed since birth and from previous lives. However, humans possess free will and can prevent their actions, thoughts, and speech from following old karmic patterns, using this as a means to eradicate diluted karmic seeds from the past. To gain self-control and break free from the influences of past habits, Buddhists must practice meditation. Concentration helps individuals become fully aware of past experiences. They will understand that their current suffering results from their own actions and recognize that desires, anger, and ignorance have bound them to the passive and painful cycle of birth and death. With this understanding, individuals gain the power to liberate themselves from the cycle of rebirth. Modern science, with its discovery of atomic energy, has proven that the law of impermanence, anicca, in Buddhism is a reality. Contemporary psychology has also uncovered the phenomenon of the unconscious within human psychology. In the future, through methods like age regression or more advanced psychoanalytic techniques, science may be able to prove the reality of rebirth. Such evidence would eliminate the final obstacle, allowing everyone to clearly understand Buddhist teachings and enabling modern humanity to find peace of mind. As Buddhists, we do not need scientific evidence to believe in rebirth. For us, rebirth is a reality because we have witnessed many who can remember their recent past lives. The Buddha has taught us the Noble Eightfold Path to achieve liberation from suffering and rebirth. With the path laid out, we can proceed with strong faith. The issue of dependent origination. During the Buddha's era, the principle behind the existence of all things was a highly debated topic in Indian philosophical circles. The Brahmajala Sutra records 62 different explanations from Indian philosophical schools of that time. Among these, 3 main tendencies can be identified. 1. Determinism, Pabhakata Hetu. Philosophies following this tendency believed that everything in nature and human life was predestined. They asserted that all events operated according to pre-existing natural laws. Human and material agency was not acknowledged here. 2. Theism, Isara Mamara Hetu. Philosophies of this tendency argued that all phenomena existed due to the will of a divine being, typically Brahma. This perspective was central to Brahmanism. 3. Randomism, Ahetuapakaya. Philosophies adhering to this tendency denied the law of cause and effect. They claimed that all phenomena arose and existed randomly without any law or principle. The first and second tendencies attributed all responsibility to a supernatural force, negating individual accountability. Human actions, whether good or bad, were not seen as drivers of success or failure. The third tendency also failed to establish a foundation for individual moral responsibility. If everything was random, then good, evil, misfortune, and fortune were also random, leaving no standard for human conduct. Consequently, individuals could not progressively move towards truth, beauty, and goodness. Instead, they were prone to fall into sin and degradation. From a logical standpoint, these philosophies had significant flaws. From a human perspective, the outcomes they proposed were bleak and demoralizing. None could inspire confidence or affirm the inherent potential and agency within humans. The Buddhist stance was to elucidate a universal principle that could serve as a foundation for a way of life. This principle had to align with the reality of myriad phenomena and guide individuals towards achieving ethical and spiritual values. The Buddha's aim in the long discourses was not merely to refute other theories, but to discredit philosophical misconceptions that hindered ethical and liberative practices. The Buddha's worldview is the principle of dependent origination, paticca samuppada. All phenomena arise in dependence on conditions and are interconnected. Nothing exists in isolation or absolutely. Everything is interrelated. Terms like cause, hetu, condition, pakaya, factor, nidana, and accumulation, samadaya, in Buddhist scriptures all refer to this interconnectedness. The Buddha defined dependent origination as follows: if this exists, that exists. If this arises, that arises. If this does not exist, that does not exist. If this ceases, that ceases. This principle highlights both simultaneous and sequential relationships among phenomena. Simultaneous relationships are presented as, if this exists, that exists, while sequential relationships are presented as, if this arises, that arises. All phenomena arise, exist, and cease through these interdependent relationships. No phenomenon can exist independently and absolutely. A cause might produce different effects depending on accompanying conditions. Therefore, there are no absolute causes or effects. The universe comprises systems of simultaneous and sequential dependent origination. This understanding forms the Buddhist concept of causality. The term conditioned phenomena, samkata dhamma, in Buddhist texts refers to these interdependent phenomena. All are impermanent and subject to change precisely because of these interdependent conditions. This understanding refutes the idea of a self-existing creator God. This is a significant point we must acknowledge. According to the Huayan school, the entire universe is an intricate, infinite web of dependent origination. The Huayan doctrine is based on the interdependent causality concept from the Agamas. The Abhidharma texts of Theravada Buddhism also classify dependent origination to analyze and understand it. This is a primary task for the Thera sect scholars. The Mahapurana identifies 24 conditions. The Sariputra Abhidharma lists 10 conditions, and the Sarvastivada school proposes 4 conditions. Here we briefly examine 2 types, simultaneous causality and sequential causality. 1. Simultaneous causality. This also addresses the subject-object relationship. The Buddha taught that the world is an interaction between subjective perception and objective objects. Outside this interaction there is no world. Monks, I shall explain to you the nature of all things. Listen carefully. Monks, what is meant by all things? It is the eye and forms, ear and sounds, nose and smells, tongue and tastes, body and touch, mind and objects. Monks, this is what is meant by all things. Thus, the world is constituted by the interaction between the 6 senses and the 6 sense objects. Without these interactions, everything is meaningless to us. Therefore, as the Buddha taught, without the subject, there is no object, and without the object, there is no subject. If the subject-object relationship is severed, the world cannot be established. All are formed based on this interdependence, just as 2 bundles of reeds support each other. Friends, like 2 bundles of reeds supporting each other, so do name and form depend on consciousness, and consciousness depends on name and form. If one bundle is taken away, the other will fall. Similarly, with the cessation of name and form, consciousness ceases. With the cessation of consciousness, name and form cease. Name and form here refers to the psychophysical structure of sentient beings, serving as objects for consciousness, which is subjective perception. But name and form do not exist independently outside consciousness. Both rely on each other to be established. There is a profound interrelationship with neither preceding the other. Without this interrelationship, neither can exist. 2. Sequential causality. This is also the issue of continuous existence. All phenomena, though impermanent and ever-changing, do not completely cease. No individual entity is eternal and unchanging. but there are always continuous streams of phenomena. All things change continuously according to specific principles. The Buddha particularly emphasized the explanation of the continuous stream of life, i.e., the phenomena of sentient beings. He taught that the fundamental driving forces of samsara are ignorance and craving. Sentient beings are composed of past experiences and karmic causes. Based on current karmic causes, sentient beings progress to future life stages. Ethically, the Buddha elucidated the principle of ripening causes and effects. Psychologically, he explained the principle of similar causes and corresponding results. Metaphysically, he presented the principle of the 12 links of dependent origination. Although 2,500 years ago, terminologies and expressions were limited, the texts of the four agamas still convey these profound teachings. In summary, the Buddhist concept of causality, in a narrow sense, is merely the law of causality. But in a broader sense, it is not just purely logical cause-effect relationships. The Buddhist concept of causality encompasses moral and liberative relationships, spanning the 10 directions and traversing past, present, and future. One is intricately connected to all, and all can be perceived through one. An ancient Vietnamese Zen master expressed this principle in two profound lines. A grain of dust contains all worlds. Emptiness is revealed when all is lost. Another Vietnamese Zen master from the Lee dynasty illustrated this. The universe within a hair's tip, the sun and moon in a mustard seed. Here, the concepts of large and small lose their conventional meanings. A mustard seed, though small, is established based on the interrelationship of the entire universe. The universe, though vast, cannot exist without its connection to the tiny mustard seed. Thus, another Zen master from the Lai dynasty wrote, "The cosmos fits within a hair's tip, the sun and moon dwell in a mustard seed." The concepts of large and small here transcend conventional dimensions. A mustard seed, though small, is formed through its relationship with the whole. The entire universe contributes to its creation, just as it integrates with the universe to create the sun and moon. With it, everything exists. Without it, nothing does. Heaven and earth can rest on a hair's tip. This expresses the same idea. The universe and all beings are woven from infinite systems of dependent origination. This is Buddhism's fundamental and profound insight. Based on this understanding, transcendental teachings and mystical practices are established. Modern science has transcended simple one-dimensional causality concepts and is approaching Buddhism's view of interconnected, dependent origination. We hope that one day the torch of dependent origination will fully illuminate, dispelling beliefs in determinism, randomness, and divine creation, so humanity can recognize their true path. The issue of self, the concept of the self, is actually just an illusion of the self. There are two types of self-illusion: innate self-illusion and conceptual self-illusion. Innate self-illusion. Innate self-illusion is the kind of self-illusion that exists from the moment of birth, not something acquired through conceptual discrimination. This type of self-illusion has existed since beginningless time and only completely vanishes when one attains Buddhahood. As long as one remains a sentient being, this illusion persists. Innate self-illusion has two functions of discrimination. 1. Direct self-illusion. This refers to the manas consciousness matrika, which by associating with the cognitive aspect of the alaya consciousness, grasps the images it projects as its own objective aspect. This is a deep, inherent, and ingrained self-illusion. 2. Conceptual self-illusion. When directly engaging with objects, mental factors such as self-view, self-love, self-conceit, and self-delusion arise to discriminate and cling. Both types of self-illusion associated with manas are difficult to eradicate, as they exist prior to the emergence of individual life and have been present since beginningless time. On the path of practice, the practitioner must contemplate the emptiness of inherent existence to gradually eradicate them. Conceptual self-illusion. Conceptual self-illusion is the kind of self-illusion that arises after the formation of the body, through conceptual discrimination and clinging. This type of self-illusion is easier to eradicate once the practitioner reaches the stage of insight, darshana marga, contemplating the emptiness of self-nature. It can be destroyed. Conceptual self-illusion pertains to the conscious mind vijnana and also has two functions of discrimination. 1. Direct self-illusion. This refers to the conscious mind that directly grasps the whole of physiological and psychological phenomena as the self, without requiring conceptual discrimination. 2. Deliberative self-illusion. This refers to the conscious mind that grasps the self through deliberate and analytical thinking. Conceptual self-illusion naturally relies on innate self-illusion to manifest. However, the environment and consciousness are essential factors for its manifestation. In manas, self-illusion is always subtly present. In the conscious mind, direct self-illusion formed by deliberative self-illusion also relies on this foundation. At birth, a child's awareness of the self is very vague, as their conceptual self-illusion is still weakly nurtured by consciousness and external conditions. It can be clearly stated that at this stage, deliberative self-illusion is vaguely present, but direct self-illusion has not yet developed. However, their innate self-illusion is fully present, just like in adults. As children grow, they begin to form concepts about themselves and others, and start to distinguish between themselves and others, between themselves and objects. Through the interaction between senses and objects, they discern their body from other objects. Thus, for children, their self is their physical body. The clear distinction between themselves and others trains their consciousness in direct self-illusion. Many adults also conceptualize the self just like children, equating the self with their physical body. Only those whose deliberative self-illusion has become more refined will have different concepts about the self. Some no longer consider the physical body as the self and say, "I want to be free from this body." Hence, I and the body are considered separate. Such individuals likely consider the self, lemoi, as consciousness, a unified soul that can exist independently of the physical body. Others may view the self as a totality of all knowledge, thoughts, and feelings, lacking unity. So what is the self? It's difficult to answer because according to Buddhist philosophy, it cannot be truly comprehended as it doesn't really exist. The self we conceptualize must be something unique, unchanging, and capable of control. Let's examine what in us is unique, unchanging, and capable of control. Is it the physical body? The physical body constantly changes every hour, every minute. It's a collection of countless living cells that change rapidly. Is it the mind? The mind is a collection of all thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and these phenomena continue to change, never remaining the same and have no unity. We cannot say the self is the totality of physical and mental elements because together they also lack unity. If we say the self is something neither physical nor mental, that is, the self is beyond the aggregates, it would be as empty as space, having no function at all. How can it be called the self? When we say, "I am in Saigon," the I refers to the physical body. When we say, "I think and dream," the I does not refer to the body but to consciousness. When we say, "I write a speech," the I refers to both the body and consciousness because we need the mind to think and the hands to write. So what is the I? Is it the body, the consciousness, or both combined? Why is there this inconsistency? Can the I be both the body and consciousness? Is the I two or one? Furthermore, when we say my body is large, what is the I here? It is obviously the one who possesses a body. The body is the possession of the I. Therefore, the body is not the I. So, is there an I outside the body? We also say, my consciousness, your consciousness. Therefore, consciousness is also a possession of the I. So is there an I outside consciousness? Is this I abstract or concrete? If abstract, what is its nature? If concrete, what is it? If neither abstract nor concrete, is it nothing? Saying that the self is both identical and changing does not work either. If the identical part is different from the changing part, it is not unique. If it is not different, it changes and cannot be called identical. Therefore, the self is just a vague and erroneous concept about something unique, unchanging, and capable of control, which in reality cannot exist. Life is merely a continuous flow in which there is no controlling self. A year ago, I bought a bicycle. After a few months, I replaced the wheels. After 6 months, I changed the tires. The bicycle changed, but I still said it was my bicycle from before. Over time, I replaced the bell, the brakes, the lights, the frame, the spokes, the gears, everything. Now the bicycle stands by the wall. Even though it has completely changed, I still say it is the bicycle I bought years ago. So does the bicycle have a unique, unchanging soul that makes me think it is the same bicycle? If the form of the bicycle changes, there must be something unchanging inside, like a bicycle soul, making me believe it is the same bicycle. In reality, there is no bicycle soul. The bicycle is a continuous flow without a controlling self. Our body and mind are also a continuous flow without a controlling self. Hence, the subjective self, le moi sujet, and the objective self, le moi objet, are both mere names, not realities, created by discriminative false views. The false view of consciousness relies on the false view of manas. The deep root of self-illusion lies in manas. Manas, being the crystallization of ignorance, always takes the cognitive aspect of a liar as its object and clings to it as the self, firmly and unceasingly. A liar naturally, without wanting to, becomes the self-image and is clung to by manas. This clinging is deeply illogical but also profoundly ingrained, making it difficult to understand and eradicate with mere consciousness. Through the practice of meditation, we can clearly see and eliminate it. By practicing meditation, we can transform self-illusion into wisdom, into equanimity knowledge, samatha jnana, the wisdom that perceives the absolute equality of all phenomena, without distinguishing between self and others. When one realizes the non-self nature of self and phenomena, reaching the stage of joy, the lowest stage of a bodhisattva, consciousness can use contemplation to prevent the four mental afflictions of self-delusion, self-view, self-conceit, and self-love, as well as the 8 primary delusions from manifesting. As a result, manas loses much of its defilement and begins to approach equanimity knowledge. Manas in the process of liberation plays a passive role. The true liberator is consciousness. Until one reaches the 7th stage of a bodhisattva, consciousness is not yet fully established in the true nature of the non-self, and the self-illusion of phenomena still remains. At this stage, manas stops clinging to a liar, and the innate self-illusion is eradicated. Upon reaching the 7th stage, consciousness ceases the false discrimination between self and others, but the self-illusion of phenomena still persists. At the 8th stage and beyond, both self-illusion and phenomena illusion are completely eradicated, leaving only the subtle traces of phenomena illusion. At this point, the false self-illusion is permanently destroyed. When manas is fully transformed into equanimity knowledge, reaching the state of Buddhahood, it can manifest as the other benefit body to guide sentient beings. The concept of meditation study. When discussing meditation study, we often think of Zen Buddhism, a prominent school of Buddhist thought that has flourished in China, Japan, and Vietnam in the past. However, meditation study encompasses many different types, not just the Mahayana Zen that we see in the Zen schools of these 3 countries. The term meditation comes from the Sanskrit word dhyana, or the Pali word jhana, meaning contemplation or meditative absorption. The Yoga school, one of the 6 schools of Indian philosophy, considers meditation to be the 7th stage in the 8 stages of practice. Theravada Buddhism particularly emphasizes the 4 stages of meditation and regards it as a crucial practice. In Mahayana Buddhism, meditation is one of the 6 paramitas, 6 methods to reach the shore of liberation, and includes various methods of practice and realization. Though there are many types, meditation always implies contemplation and meditative absorption. The method of meditation involves focusing the mind on an object for contemplation and investigation. The method of meditation is holistic, meaning it involves both the body and mind simultaneously. However, for analysis, we can divide it into 2 parts, form and content. Form, this involves physical training to make the body tranquil, aiding the unification of the mind. In any form of meditation, physical training is considered very important because without it, meditation practice will not succeed. A person meditating with a weak body will find it difficult to achieve results. Content, this involves the concentration and contemplation of the mind. Through concentration and unification, the mind becomes powerful. This mental force is used for contemplation and investigation, leading to enlightenment. In summary, meditation is the realization of enlightenment, the realization of the ideal. This ideal is the focal point of contemplation, brought to the center of the unified mind for investigation and realization. Besides the term meditation, Buddhism also has the term shamatha vipassana. Shamatha means the tranquil state of the mind, and vipassana means contemplative insight based on this tranquil state of mind. Shamatha and vipassana need to be practiced in balance. If shamatha is overemphasized, the practitioner may fall into a state of semi-sleepiness, losing vigor. If vipassana is overemphasized, the mind will become scattered and restless. In summary, in focusing on the ideal and investigating the object of contemplation, the practitioner must be very calm, thus establishing a balance between shamatha and vipassana. Due to different methods and concepts, meditation has various types. Master Zongmi of the Tang Dynasty in his book Chan Yuan Ju Quan Ji Du Shu distinguishes 5 types of meditation. 1. Externalist meditation. This type of meditation accepts the existence of divine worlds beyond the self and seeks to escape the present world to reach these divine worlds. This is the method and goal of externalist meditation. 2. Ordinary person's meditation. Believing in the law of cause and effect, this type of meditation aims to reach better shared worlds than the present one. This meditation does not yet have the power to liberate one from the 3 realms. 3. Hinayana meditation. This type of meditation believes in the doctrine of no self and aims at the extinction of the self. 4. Mahayana meditation. This type of meditation recognizes both the self and the external world as empty and seeks to merge with this wonderful truth of emptiness. 5. Supreme meditation of the Tathagata. This type of meditation realizes one's potential to become a Buddha and aims to fully realize the Buddha nature within, achieving perfect self-awareness, enlightening others, and completing the practice of enlightenment. Master Zongmi explains, Supreme meditation is the meditation practice that relies on recognizing the inherent purity of the mind, free from defilements. The innate nature of wisdom is fully present, and this mind is the Buddha, completely without distinction. Supreme meditation is also known as the samadhi of one practice, the samadhi of true suchness, and the pure meditation of the Tathagata. The meditation transmitted to China by Bodhidharma and to Vietnam by Vinny Teruzzi is precisely this supreme meditation of the Tathagata. Although very brief, Master Zongmi's classification can be considered accurate. However, we can also distinguish the characteristics of different types of meditation study based on their special traits. Some meditations aim to separate body and mind, hoping to extinguish the will to live to be freed from the suffering of life. These types of meditation have a pessimistic and inactive nature. Other meditations aim to be reborn in heavenly realms, characterized by emotional and devotional aspects, relying on external forces. Some meditations rely entirely on one's inherent ability, having a self-reliant nature. From a philosophical and religious perspective, meditation study must particularly focus on the issue of the self. This is a key issue in meditation, forming the basis for other issues such as life and liberation. Philosophy and religion have long aimed to resolve the issue of the self. Even now, the issue of the self remains a central issue in philosophy. Initially and usually, the self is simply the physical body of each person. Although this is a simple concept, it is fundamental because the body is the basis for observing the entire self. However, the physical body is not truly the self. If the physical body were the self, then when someone loses an arm, the self would also lose a part. But in reality, this is not the case. A person with a missing arm still perceives themselves as a complete self like anyone else. Furthermore, besides one's body, there are possessions, family, and nation, all of which can be identified with the self. In summary, the self is something flexible. It tends to delve inward and expand outward. The boundary between the internal and external worlds is the body. From the body to breath, from breath to inner mind, from inner mind to the true self, this is the inward path. From the body to family, from family to nation, from nation to humanity, and from humanity to the universe, this is the outward expansion. A person is primarily a combination of the 5 aggregates: form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. Form is material. Sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness are mental. The link between the material and mental aspects is breathing. Through breathing, a person can enter the inner life, observing the phenomena of sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. Here, the subject of observation and the object of observation are one, and therefore constantly change. Feelings, thoughts, perceptions related to the external world under the influence of the physical body All these psychological phenomena change and cannot be called the self. The self must be something identical and unchanging. The self must be a purely subjective principle, a purely active principle, and as such, it transcends the realm of experience, the realm of the non-self. Using concepts to directly approach the self is impossible, because saying the self is this, the self is that, means treating the self as an object of perception. And once it is an object of perception, it must change and perish, and thus cannot be the self. Therefore, the self must be absolute. Theoretically, the absolute self is established through an ultimate assumption. Practically, the absolute self can only be approached through direct intuition. Language and thought cannot reach and describe it. Using the body as the starting point to delve into the inner world, eliminating non-self elements, ultimately leading to an ultimate assumption that the true self lies deep within and transcends the realm of experience. This is the inward path. In terms of outward expansion, the self can include family, nation, and society. When a person expends effort and energy to support their family, they no longer consider the self to be just the body. Many ethical scholars, scientists, and warriors have sacrificed for morality, humanity, and the nation out of love for people and the country. Their self has expanded from their body to their race, their country. Most of these people have overcome the base desires of the body. Those who have completely conquered these desires find their self encompassing all humanity and the universe. For them, nothing is non-self that needs to be excluded. Everything that was previously seen as non-self is now self, not missing a single hair. Thus, in terms of form, the self can contract to the smallest extent or expand to the greatest extent. The body is the basis for this contraction and expansion. Looking at the form, there seem to be two opposing extremes. But in terms of actual content, we see that the greatest and the smallest are in complete agreement. If we realize the true nature of the absolute self, the apparent contradiction in form disappears. Failing to realize the true self means having a mistaken view of the self. Ordinary people see the self as the body and only worry about that body. Recognizing the body as the self, indulging and satisfying the body's desires, ordinary people fall into two major errors. Externally, they are selfish, greedy, and malicious, lacking the generosity to accept others and unable to expand the self. Internally, they lack the ability to self-reflect and introspect, and therefore never hope to directly realize their true self. Conversely, if we gradually free ourselves from the constraints of bodily desires externally, we will merge gradually with the great self, and internally, we will eliminate false thoughts to gradually achieve direct intuition of the true self. The more profound the inner life, the broader the external life. Saints who deeply enter the inner life develop infinite compassion, seeing all beings within the true self, and use that compassion to encompass everything. Therefore, the self expands infinitely, and the true self harmonizes with the universe in complete unity. The nature of the self is like this, but what is the essence of the self? An ultimate assumption must be reached. We cannot deny the existence of an absolute self as the essence of our being. This absolute self is the full life force, the absolute life. Our life is the self, always tending towards the absolute, the infinite. It merges with the absolute and infinite great self. In essence, the great self does not separate from us. Because if the absolute great self were separate from us, it would no longer be called the absolute great self. Obviously, this absolute essence does not lie within the scope of our relative perception. We cannot conceptualize it. It can only be tentatively called by a name, such as Dharma body, Buddha nature, true suchness, emptiness, and cannot be explained by language or understood by reasoning. This essence is absolutely free and eternally unchanging. It is the essence, the driving force of the full life flow, and it is our nature. This is what we must realize through meditation study. We must realize this absolute self, as it is the basis of all entities and phenomena. Trees and grasses are expressions of this absolute self. Zen practitioners often say, all sentient and insentient beings have Buddha nature because of this. To realize the great self, we do not need to seek externally. We do not need to study the history of human civilization, analyze ethical phenomena, or understand physiological and physical phenomena to find the great self. Although all these phenomena lie within the absolute life flow, they are still relative phenomena. To reach the absolute self, we must rely on absolute principles. As mentioned earlier, the method of meditation involves controlling sensations and focusing on the ideal point, using shamatha vipassana to clear away false movements and directly realize the true self. Initially using breathing to move from the body into the mind, then focusing the mind on the true self, directly merging with the true self. Realizing the true self is also realizing the absolute great self, because both are the non-dual essence. Directly pointing to the human mind, seeing the nature, becoming Buddha, is precisely this idea. Thus, the enlightenment of meditation study lies in the unified force of the mind and the ability to directly realize the true self. Once enlightened, the practitioner no longer lives in fragmented false selves and resides in an absolutely unified realm. This unified realm cannot be described by language, only directly experienced. In the realm of realization, there are occasional unique expressions that seem entirely illogical and contradictory from a rational perspective, making them impossible to comprehend. These strange words and actions only make sense to those whose minds are close to enlightenment and awaiting the guidance of those who have directly realized the truth. Thank you for listening. If you found this video helpful, please share it with those who might benefit from it. Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Hit the like button, follow, and turn on the notification bell. This is how you can show your support for me. Once again, thank you very much, and see you in the next videos.